He thought it was insomnia, until he realized it was always the same voice giving the same order. Have you ever woken up in the middle of the night? For no reason at all. The room was silent. The house was completely dark. And yet, that strange feeling that you're not alone? Imagine opening your eyes and every night at the exact same minute, 3:15 a.m., hearing a voice whispering in your ear, "Get up and look in the mirror." You try to ignore it. You try to pretend it's just insomnia. But the voice comes back, always in the same tone, always at the same time, always the same phrase, until the day you finally obey and your reflection smiles before you. If that already gave you goosebumps, imagine what comes next. Like, subscribe to the channel and get ready for a story that challenges everything you believe about reality. For many years, Raphael believed he suffered from a strange type of insomnia. Every night, without fail, he would wake at exactly 3:15 a.m. At first, he blamed stress, work, or anxiety. But over time, he realized there was something more to it. He would wake with his body sweaty, his eyes wide, and the distinct feeling that he was not alone. The room remained dark and silent, but a presence seemed to watch him. And then, always the same phrase, whispered close to his ear, "Get up and look in the mirror." The first few times, he ignored it. He covered his ears with the pillow, turned over, and tried to think of something else. But the feeling wouldn't go away. The atmosphere around him changed. The air grew thicker, the silence heavier. It was as if time had stopped at that particular moment and the world around him had shut down. Even as he tried to rationalize, something inside him knew this wasn't normal. The routine repeated itself for weeks. Raphael began to note the times he woke up, always 3:15 a.m., always with the same voice, the same command. He changed beds, changed rooms, sold the mirror, but it all came back. Even in a new apartment, in a new city, at 3:15 a.m., the voice would reappear. The phrase continued. The command was the same. Tired and tormented, one November morning, Raphael decided to obey. He got up, walked to the bathroom, and stared into the mirror. For a moment, everything seemed normal. He saw only himself, with his tired face, his sunken eyes. But when he blinked, his reflection didn't blink back. It stared at him, as if waiting for something. A chill ran down his spine. In the following days, his dreams changed. Raphael began seeing figures dressed in white, endless corridors of mirrors, and doors that opened by themselves. There was always a figure in the background repeating, "You trapped me here." The voices multiplied, and he began waking not only at 3:15 a.m., but with his body in positions he didn't remember sleeping in. Once, he was sitting in front of the mirror with his eyes open, but he didn't remember getting out of bed. It was then that he decided to investigate. He searched through old family records, questioned his grandmother, and researched old photos. He discovered that the mirror had belonged to his great-great-grandfather, a man involved in spiritualist practices in the 19th century. He performed rituals to communicate with the other side and claimed to have created a mirror of return, an object capable of storing and transporting consciousness between planes. What Raphael saw in the records was disturbing. His great-great-grandfather had mysteriously disappeared after the final ritual, and by all indications, he had left something behind, or someone. From that moment on, Raphael began to observe his reflection more closely. He smiled when Raphael didn't. He moved his lips without making a sound. Until, one morning, the reflection simply said, "It's almost time." That's when Raphael realized this wasn't just another recurring nightmare. It was a cycle that needed to end or repeat, and he would have to choose its fate or let his reflection choose for him. And it all started with what he thought was just insomnia. With each dawn, the present seemed closer. Raphael began to get chills even before waking, as if his body already knew what was coming. In an attempt to get rid of it, he covered the mirror with a thick sheet. The next day, the sheet was neatly folded beside his bed. Thinking it was a trick of his mind, he tied it with duct tape. but the tape would come loose in the morning, and the mirror, uncovered, uncomfortable. He decided to remove the mirror from the wall and hide it inside the closet. That night at 3:15 a.m., the phrase echoed louder, "Get up and look in the mirror." And this time, it was as if someone was inside the closet, calling. Raphael was no longer sleeping well. He was exhausted, with dark circles under his eyes and anxiety attacks. He began recording late-night audio on his cell phone. In one of the recordings, he clearly heard a drawn-out whisper repeating the phrase that had haunted him so much. He tried to show it to friends, but no one heard anything but noise. The voice seemed to exist only for him. He determined to destroy the mirror. Using a hammer, he smashed it into pieces. He buried the fragments in the backyard of a country house where he often vacationed with his parents. He slept peacefully that night, or at least he thought he did, because at 3:15 a.m., he woke with a pain in his chest and the sensation that someone was standing over his bed. When he turned on the light, there was nothing there, but the sound of shards of glass being stepped on came from the hallway. Raphael became desperate. He prayed, screamed, begged for peace, but the voice returned every night, this time more aggressive. It was no longer a request, it was an order. That was when, for the first time, he realized it wasn't insomnia or madness. It was something much older, deeper, something that wanted to be seen, something that needed him. The next night, he decided to obey again. Even without a mirror, he walked to the hallway, where a mirror had hung since the move. When he reached it, the light bulb flickered and the air turned chilly. Looking at the reflection, he saw himself, but the reflection smiled before he did, and whispered, "We're almost there." At that moment, Raphael knew there was no turning back. The cycle had begun again, and he was the key. At dawn on the 7th day, Raphael's eyes suddenly opened. The digital clock read exactly 3:15 a.m. His body, tired from the repetition of what he still called insomnia, was already getting out of bed on its own, as if obeying a silent command. But that night, it wouldn't be just another restless vigil. He was determined. For the first time, he would face this head-on. The whispered voice that had been tormenting him so much came again. "Get up and look in the mirror." The room was plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the crack in the half-open bathroom door, where the oval mirror hanging over. The sink reflected part of the darkness. With slow steps, Raphael crossed the hallway to the bathroom. He felt the cool air brush against the back of his neck, and the hairs on his arms stood on end, with a sensation that went beyond fear. It was as if something already knew he would finally obey. He stopped in front of the mirror. His tired eyes stared at his own reflection. The silence was absolute. At first, nothing happened. He stood there motionless, waiting for some sign, some movement. His eyes were fixed on the reflection, until something tiny but deeply disturbing occurred. Raphael in the mirror blinked, but Raphael hadn't blinked. A shiver ran down his spine like an electric current. He took a step back, never looking away. His mind searched for a rational explanation. Maybe he was so exhausted that his senses were failing. Maybe it was just a late reflex, a trick of the light, but his heart told him otherwise. Something had moved on the other side. That night, Raphael couldn't sleep again. He sat up in bed, staring at the bathroom door, which remained ajar as if waiting for a new visitor. For the first time, he felt that whatever was calling him wasn't just a hallucination. There was intelligence. There was intent. The next day, he took the mirror down from the wall. He thought that perhaps by getting rid of it, he could put an end to everything. But when he put it away in the basement, the voice returned, this time more insistent, more present, even without the mirror. Visible at 3:15 a.m., he would wake up and hear the same phrase echoing, "Get up and look in the mirror." The experience of that first contact had changed something inside him. The line between dream, imagination, and reality began to blur. The reflection now awaited him, and he knew, if there were to be a next time, simply looking wouldn't be enough. The night after that first time, he stared into the mirror at 3:15 a.m. something shifted inside him. It wasn't just the shiver that ran down his spine, nor the strangeness of seeing his reflection blinking before him. It was the constant feeling of being watched, as if a silent presence hovered behind his shoulder at all times. As he slept, dreams were no longer dreams. They became vivid fragments of something that felt more real than the day itself. In the first nightmare, he was in an endless mirrored corridor with reflections of himself everywhere, but only one of them smiled. In the second, he saw himself lying in bed, as if someone else were watching him sleep, until the moment the mirror's reflection rose while he was still motionless. Most disturbing, however, was the phrase that repeated in every dream, "You trapped me here." Over the next few days, the visions began to bleed into reality. As he brushed his teeth, the mirror seemed to darken in the corners, as if a shadow were trying to take shape there. At one point, he swore he heard the sound of glass cracking, even though the mirror was intact. The anguish became routine, heavy eyelids, fear of the dark, a growing desire to avoid any reflective surface. One morning, he woke up sweating. The house was completely silent, but someone's heavy breathing seemed to echo inside the room. When he got up, he saw in the hallway mirror not himself, but a white figure, still. When he turned on the light, everything disappeared. It was intensifying, and he no longer knew if he was awake or trapped in an eternal nightmare. Seeking some explanation, he called his grandmother, one of the few in the family who still talked about things of the spirit. When he mentioned the dreams of broken mirrors and voices, she fell silent for several seconds and then said, "You touched the portal, but it's not you he wants." That same night, he had the worst dream of all. A dark hall, flickering candles, and a circle of people dressed in white. They all slowly turned toward him and pointed. In the center, a faceless figure said, "You're in the wrong place. Let us go." "Back!" He woke screaming, with red marks on his arms as if he'd been grabbed. There was no one in the house, but he knew something had touched him. It was more than insomnia. It was a calling, and he had answered. But now I didn't know how to turn off the echo coming from the other side of the mirror. The days following the mirror visions were marked by a disturbing silence. During the day, nothing unusual happened, but when night fell, the atmosphere changed. The air seemed denser, the room's temperature lower, and the mirror, even when turned off, emitted a faint, almost imperceptible hum. It was on one of these nights, amidst the anguish of no longer knowing what was dream and what was reality, that he decided to investigate the origin of that mirror. He began by rummaging through old papers in his grandmother's attic, where the mirror had originally been installed. Among dusty boxes, he found a locked wooden chest. Curiously, the key was inside an envelope, taped to the inside of the lid. Upon opening the chest, he found aged documents written in faded ink dating back to the 19th century. They included letters, newspaper clippings, and, to his surprise, a small diary with the name A. Ramos engraved on the cover, his great-great-grandfather's name. Leafing through the diary, he found detailed accounts of spiritualist practices, mediumistic sessions, and, in particular, notes about an object described as an astral channeling mirror. On one page, there was an illustration that made him freeze. It was the same mirror, the frame carved with ancient symbols, the irregularly stained glass, and even the crack in the upper corner, all exactly the same. Beside the drawing, a scrawled sentence read, "Mirrors don't just reflect the present, they hold echoes of the past." The diary recounted that the mirror had been used as a ritual instrument to connect with the other side. The great-great-grandfather claimed that, in states of deep meditation, it was possible to use the mirror to visualize fragments of past lives or communicate with entities that had not yet completed their earthly cycle. In one of his last entries, he describes a ritual abruptly interrupted by fear, and since then he claimed to feel presences around the mirror, presences that observed him even in his dreams. Shocked, the protagonist connected the dots. The mirror wasn't just a decorative item inherited by the family, it was an artifact charged with spiritual memory. And the voice that called to him every morning at 3:15 a.m. was part of something much larger, an unfinished cycle, an unclosed portal, an ancestral call. His great-great-grandfather's words came back with a vengeance. If you hear the voice, respond with awareness. What's on the other side also wants to live. Now, the protagonist understood that his connection to the mirror went beyond blood. It was an inherited spiritual bond, as if the mirror had chosen him. He felt, for the first time, that he wasn't just being persecuted, he was being prepared. With the revelations about his great-great-grandfather and the strange symbols carved into the mirror, the protagonist delves even deeper. Curiosity, now fueled by fear, drives him to search the house's old attic, where he finds a dark wooden box, locked with a rusty latch. Inside are leather notebooks, yellowed pages, and the strong smell of old incense. These are his great-great-grandfather's diaries, and in them, the truth begins to reveal itself. Among descriptions of rituals, dates, and symbols, one sequence stands out. The diary tells of an unfinished experiment called the Ritual of Return. The great-great-grandfather believed it was possible to break the barrier between the physical and spiritual worlds, but not to communicate with the dead, but rather to transfer a soul from one body to another. The mirror was the conduit, and the ritual, an attempt to deceive the natural order. One of the pages is marked with a red circle. It reads, "The soul trying to escape the cycle must find a mirror, but if the ritual fails, it remains trapped on the other side." The protagonist feels his stomach churn. Everything was starting to make sense. The reflex that no longer followed him, the whispered phrase at 3:15 a.m., the dreams of unknown people, and a voice repeating, "You trapped me here." Increasingly convinced that his reflection is actually a trapped consciousness, perhaps even his own great-great-grandfather, he begins to study the notebooks in depth. He finds instructions on spiritual protection, sealing symbols, and a warning. If released without balance, the soul may consume the host. The tension mounts. He begins to see his reflection smiling to itself more often, at different times, not just in the wee hours. The mirror even observes him during the day, and what was once just an inverted reflection now seems to be gaining autonomy. Certain he must act, the protagonist considers two options: destroy the mirror, which could end everything, or release something dangerous, or complete the ritual, serving as a bridge for the trapped soul to cross. The choice is before him, but as he hesitates, the mirror trembles on its own on the wall, and for the first time, he hears the voice not within his mind, but coming from the mirror itself. "Let me out, please. Time is running out." And now he understands. The theory was true. The mirror is a portal, but not every passage needs to be opened, because sometimes what's on the other side just doesn't want to leave, want to switch places. That night, at exactly 3:15 a.m., he was already awake, as if his body had learned to wake up early. There was no sound in the house, no cars on the street, no wind. Only the ticking of the clock in the hallway and the rapid beating of his own heart. Yet something was silently pulling him toward the mirror. The object was no longer hanging. It was propped up facing the bed, as if someone had placed it there. He swore he'd left the mirror tucked away in the closet, facing the wall, but now it reflected his pale face, his tired eyes, and the shadow of what appeared to be another person right behind it. Startled, he turned. Nothing. He looked back at the mirror. Still there. That presence. Still, barely perceptible, yet clear. A dark, humanoid silhouette standing in the same spot he'd been seconds before. And then he saw it. His reflection was no longer following him. While he remained motionless, the reflection began to move slowly, smiling. It was an empty smile, as if it belonged to someone who had felt nothing for a long time. And then, instinctively, he raised his hand to his face and saw the reflection do the same, but with a slight delay. The perfect synchronization had been broken. Panicked, he covered the mirror with a sheet and locked himself in his room. But the feeling didn't go away. Over the next few days, the mirrors in the house began to behave strangely. They delayed. Their reflection showed shadows in the background or flickered as if they were becoming living portals. The house became a field of constant tension. Every reflection now seemed to watch, wait, whisper. One day, not daring to enter his own bathroom, he filmed the mirror with his cell phone from outside. Watching the video, he froze. Not only was his reflection staring straight into the camera, but there was something written in vapor behind it. The phrase, "Let me back in." There was no longer any doubt. The mirror had a life of its own, or rather it carried a life that longed to break free. That entity wasn't just a presence. It was a consciousness trapped between the world of the living and the dead. And now it used its reflection as a channel to communicate, to exist, to return. From that night on, he stopped looking in the mirror, but the figure kept appearing, even when there was no reflection. After sleepless nights and his sanity hanging by a thread, he decides to delve deeper. He searches his grandmother's attic, where he finds a wooden box filled with ancient writings, documents, esoteric symbols, and a diary covered in black cloth. Upon opening it, the first pages discuss soul transitions, pacts, and mirror portals. The final pages reveal a revelation. Raphael's soul did not accept the exchange. It was trapped between worlds. Now, it seeks return. The shaky handwriting belongs to his great-great-grandfather and mentions that the mirror was the conduit through which the ritual failed. The protagonist feels his stomach churn. Raphael was a long-forgotten ancestor, cast out of the family for obscure spiritual practices. At the same moment, a crash comes from the room. As he runs, he sees the mirror cracked, but only on the inside. The reflection remains intact, but it smiles, a slow, dark smile. The man feels he is no longer just an observer. He is connected. The following days are a succession of paranormal experiences. People around him report seeing him in places he hasn't been. His dog refuses to enter the bedroom, and every night at 3:15 a.m. he wakes to the same voice. Get up, look in the mirror, release. He understands that the entity trapped there is Raphael, and that, by breaking a spiritual pact of reincarnation, trying to forcibly transfer his soul into a new body, he was trapped in the reflection by karmic forces. The cycle, however, did not end with his death. For balance to be restored, someone from the same lineage would have to face this debt. Now, the protagonist must decide, assume the role of bridge between worlds or sever the connection, which could cost him his own sanity. The mirror, once an everyday object, has become a silent judge between two destinies, freeing the soul or perpetuating the cycle. The story moves toward a profound spiritual dilemma. To what extent are we responsible for the mistakes of our ancestors? And what happens when past pacts knock on our door in the silence of the early morning? The tension was unbearable. With each dawn, the reflection took on a life of its own, more autonomy. It smiled before the protagonist, moving its lips as if saying something, but without sound. The surroundings seemed increasingly heavy, as if time had stopped around that mirror. The man could no longer sleep, eat, or work peacefully. Something was about to happen, and he knew it. He had to make a decision. It was then that he sought out a longtime spiritualist acquaintance of the family, someone who had helped his grandmother decades ago. As he explained everything that was happening, she was silent for a few moments. Then she said, "You're being used as a channel, but you still have a choice." According to her, spirits who break spiritual pacts remain trapped between worlds, and to return, they need a living link, someone related by blood, willing to look, accept, and allow the crossing. In doing so, the channel can carry fragments of the old soul, losing part of themselves in the process. The only way to break this cycle was through direct confrontation, a final mirror at the last moment. The next morning, he prepared everything. He made a protective circle of salt around the mirror. He sat in front of it at 3:15 sharp. This time, he didn't hesitate. He looked straight into his reflection and said, "If that's what you want, say it now." The reflection smiled, but something was different. He heard his own voice coming from the reflection's mouth, a blend of himself with an older, deeper, more pained timbre. "I failed, but you can fix it." Heart pounding, he clutched a hammer in one hand and his great-great-grandfather's old diary in the other. He was ready to smash the mirror and end it all. But before he could act, a final sentence appeared written on the glass, as if an invisible hand had traced the words with vapor. "If you release me, I'll disappear, but you'll never be the same." He hesitated. This was his chance to end it, but he also knew that by doing so he might carry part of that soul within himself. A mark, an echo, a spiritual inheritance. He took a deep breath, and then, with force and pain in his chest, he threw the hammer at the mirror. The glass exploded into 1,000 pieces, but none of them touched the floor. They hung suspended in the air for a few seconds and then crumbled into dust. The next moment, the wall clock struck 3:16. For the first time in months, the cycle had been broken. He slept that night like he hadn't slept in a long time, but when he woke, he found his great-great-grandfather's diary open on the floor. On a page he'd never seen before, it read, "The soul has been released, but the door is still ajar." He knew that choice had come at a price, but now at least he was the guardian, not the prey. That night something was different in the air. The cold seemed denser, and the silence in the house was almost deafening. The clock read exactly 3:14 when he got up, unhurriedly, but with the conviction that something would happen. A second later, as always, the voice, "Get up and look in the mirror." But this time, it didn't sound like a remote control. It had a tone of farewell. He walked to the mirror, now without fear, only with curiosity mixed with a sense of mission. He placed his feet on the cold floor, stood in front of the mirror, looked directly at his own reflection, and said softly, "I'm here." The reflection, for once, didn't repeat his gesture. He smiled. Slowly, he raised his left hand and touched the inside of the mirror. The image seemed to ripple like water. The man felt a strange lightness, as if part of him were being pulled, but not painfully. Then the reflection spoke, "Thank you." Soon after, the mirror went dark, not as if it had been covered by something, but as if it had simply stopped reflecting. It was just an opaque, inert surface. The voice never repeated itself, not the following night, nor any other. The next morning, when he woke, he found a brown envelope under his bedroom door. There were no signs of forced entry. Inside was a piece of aged paper with old, firm handwriting. It read, "The debt has been paid. A." He knew the A stood for Augusto, his great-great-grandfather, the one he never knew, but who was present in every reflection, every dream, every whisper. The mirror had been the bond. The spiritual inheritance was not just of blood, but of mission. From that day on, he decided to keep the mirror. He didn't destroy it. He wrapped it in black cloth and kept it in a safe place. Because even though everything was over, he knew that certain portals should not be broken, only respected. And whenever the clock strikes 3:15, he looks at the wall where the mirror used to be and wonders, has the soul been freed, or has it just passed on the duty? The truth is, in a world where so many things have explanations, some stories simply defy reason. And this, he knew, was one of them.